We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
that's complicated.
In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast network, or maybe you're listening on the Finding Freedom podcast feed. Whichever way you're tuning in, I appreciate your time, and you're really going to enjoy today's episode. A really interesting conversation. Of course, just to go back to talk about the difference between the Lions of Liberty network and the Finding Freedom feed. Of course, with the network, you get all of our shows. You get Mark's show on Monday, Brian's on Wednesday, and mine on Thursday. With the Finding Freedom feed, you get just this show every Thursday, plus some bonuses whenever I get around to adding those in. But of course, you can find my Finding Freedom feed by searching Finding Freedom. If it doesn't come up, or if there's other shows out there, because there are a couple other shows with the same name, Finding Freedom, which I should sue them, but I probably won't. What you can do is just search John Odermatt, Finding Freedom. It'll pop up. Subscribe, listen, leave a 5-star review, leave me a nice little comment there, and I'll read it on the air if you do that. That's the deal. So I don't want to waste time because I got a great interview today. I want to get right into it. Let's get to the show. Okay, we are live to the Lions of Liberty Pride with one of the Lions of Liberty Pride members, Jacob Winograd, not Winograd. I mispronounced that the first time I ever tried. But if you've listened to my show, you've probably heard some ads, some advertisements for his podcast. It's a great podcast called Daniel 3, Biblical Anarchy. And I wanted to have Jacob on to talk about his journey to liberty, his journey into becoming a Christian, how the two meld together, and really dig into some of the topics that he talks about on his show. So, Jacob, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. A long-time follower of the Pride, and it's pretty cool to be on one of these for once instead of on the watching end.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And we do have a couple people watching along as we're broadcasting live, like I said. So if you all have any questions for Jacob, feel free to drop them in the comments, and I'll try to ask them. But let's just get started off with introductions, really, for you. So let's start off with the podcast. When you tell people that you have a podcast and they say, "What's it about?" how do you explain it?
Sure. Yeah, so I do a podcast, as you mentioned, Daniel 3, Biblical Anarchy, and the genesis of that podcast was really, after I became a libertarian, kind of, a Rothbardian, Misesian, anarcho-capitalist. I kind of had a sense that there was a deep misunderstanding of like political philosophy and the state in like the modern day church. And so I started sort of a then theological journey back to the Bible to sort of re-explore like political presuppositions and whatnot, and to try to hopefully at least see if, libertarian philosophy was at least compatible with the Bible. What I actually came away with was not just a sense of compatibility, but more so a conviction that really the Bible's been tragically misunderstood, and there's so many scriptures and passages that have been, really throughout history twisted by different regimes to sort of, push their narrative, but really that the original narrative of the entire Bible, Old and New Testament, and of course, none greater than the gospel story and the example that Jesus gave us, that these things are not just compatible with libertarianism, but are necessarily, promoting a message of at least libertarianism towards the state and towards human structures and kingdoms of men. And so, I just felt this strong conviction that, like, it's so unfortunate that, you know, so many of us in the liberty movement, we think of, right-wing Christian evangelicals, and, we associate them with, maybe sometimes, okay, they want lower taxes, but they're pushing these wars, and they're pushing the war on drugs, and the government being more involved in people's lives and trying to legislate morality. And so I just felt this conviction to be like, there's already some great, Christian libertarian podcasts out there, but, that's kind of a niche. And I was just like, hey, I want to join in. I want to try to, in my own spheres of influence in my community, and in my own way and style, just, keep pushing that Overton window in the world of Christendom, to promote libertarian ideas, and to show, again, how not just the compatibility, but I think the necessary conclusion one gets from a consistent exegesis of Scripture is really a libertarian political philosophy, as well as to, at least maybe a secondary thing is to, normalize the idea within the liberty movement that Christians don't have to be statists. And as well, for people who aren't religious, I always tell them, you can view the stories in the Bible as, things that you can learn from, in the same way that you can study Greek mythology, or you can study really any piece of literature and find archetypical truths within them. So you don't necessarily have to be a religious person to I think find value from the biblical stories, and the ways in which I try to connect all these different themes. So that's pretty much it.
It's funny with libertarians, when you talk to libertarians, when you talk to an atheist libertarian, they'll say, well, everyone in the libertarian movement's a Christian. There's so many Christians in the movement. And you talk to a Christian libertarian, everyone who's libertarian is an atheist.
Right.
So it's this weird perspective, how people don't see, they just see the opposition, or the difference of really belief or faith, than really seeing the like-mindedness, which is just sort of an interesting dilemma, I guess. But I'm curious to find out, did you become a Christian first, or a libertarian first?
So I've pretty much been a Christian my whole life. I'm a pastor kid. So anyone who's a pastor kid knows sort of what that sort of situation brings. I kind of did the stereotypical, rebellion in my youth. I wouldn't say I ever identified as an atheist, but I certainly had a portion of time where I wasn't really pursuing God, or pursuing my religious convictions with any sort of effort to pray or study the Bible, or really care about going to church regularly. But as I matured, and then I got married and started having kids, that changed, and the call to be more responsible, and to kind of come back to a recommitment to God came. And so yeah, I was a Christian for kind of been loosely a Christian my whole life. Matured more into, I think, a more deeper understanding of God as an adult. It's sometimes hard when you're a pastor's kid. It's just kind of like, I don't know, there's certain dynamics about that which are kind of interesting. But yeah, I was a Christian first, and then I actually come from more of the political left. Like, I was raised in an evangelical right-wing household, but I hated all that. And I didn't know there was another way. So I kind of was like, well, I don't like conservatism. And I've always kind of been anti-war, just sort of like temperamentally. Like, I always, like I remember, kind of in my teenage years, seeing the kind of the wool come off of the nation's eyes, as far as like the war of Iraq and like Afghanistan and all that. And just kind of, seeing, all the terror and the harm that we had caused them, like the war on terror. And really, it's like the American military is the one doing most of the terrorism.
Right.
So I just kind of got this, like, bad taste in my mouth for conservatism, and didn't know really anything about libertarianism. I had heard about, Ron Paul was kind of becoming a thing when I was like late in high school, and I was like on the speech and debate team. So I was into politics, but I never really gave him an honest shake, because it just didn't work out that way. So I kind of fell in with the political left. Like 2015, I was a avid Bernie Sanders supporter, and pushed for him. unfortunately voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, kind of reluctantly. I bought into the propaganda that Trump was going to be more of a warmonger than she was, which in hindsight, like, say what you want about Trump, but kind of a, at the very least, that's, I think, kind of a silly assumption to make.
So I'm
But
curious. So when you were on the political left, where did you typically get your news from?
so I would listen to like the Young Turks, some mainstream stuff, but I was always kind of skeptical of the mainstream narrative. So I was always looking into alternative media. I liked the Young Turks back in the day. I watched, Joe Rogan, and he used to kind of have more left of center people on a lot, and still does.
Mm-hmm.
I watched and listened to like Vox and things like that. There's a David Pakman was another guy I was uh, big into. A couple others, can't quite remember, but that's, yeah, kind of mostly alternative media. I didn't necessarily, I've always had like that anti-authoritarian streak in me. Like I never really trusted anything mainstream. So I've always been, a bit dissident no matter where I was.
So was it a moment or something? What happened that triggered your personal, you know,
Yeah.
I don't want
So
to say
part of it,
libertarian moment, but
yeah.
wake up to liberty.
So it was sort of a journey that started with the 2016 election with Trump, because like I bought into all the fear mongering about him, right? Like like he
Mm-hmm.
gets elected, and like my wife is like, are we okay? Like, like thinking like all the doomsday things that people have said about him are about to happen. Well, then like the entire year of his first year of his presidency passes, and I'm just like, wait, this is kind of more of the same. Like it doesn't really make any sense. And then the derangement syndrome around Trump really pushed the left, as we see, like, especially today. That's kind of that's really evolved into something
Mm-hmm.
horrific. But that started with Trump in 2016, and the left started going way more radical, way more like even like doubling and tripling down on identity politics and this cancel culture stuff. And I think my Christian upbringing always made me a bit resistant to that stuff. I kind of got into it a little bit, but never too heavy. And then when they started to get just, rabid with all that, it just no longer, like, it no longer fit me. And I kind of discovered Dave Rubin around then, and he kind of was
Okay.
having a similar experience of the whole, like, I didn't leave the left left me. So I kind of then was more kind of center moderate homeless kind of political person, and I started being more open to talking to right of center people. And then I just kind of started like binging different podcasts, trying to learn more about different political points of view. And uh, through Dave Rubin and watching Joe Rogan, I just stumbled upon one day Sam Cedar was also someone I used to listen to, and so I found a debate between Sam Cedar and Dave Smith on libertarianism, which was interesting. And that kind of like was the first time I ever heard someone really offer compelling economic arguments against sort of like the Bernie Sanders, like democratic socialist perspectives on economic disparities and the economic collapse of 2008, and all these social programs that I thought were necessary. And so Dave Smith was the first one I heard that offered kind of a compelling case. I started looking
So
more
had
into
you
that, and then
sorry to interrupt, but so because honestly, most of the people I talk to who come to understand the ideas of liberty do come from the right. It's not often that I do have someone on from the left, so I have questions about it. So when did you first learn about the Federal Reserve and monetary inflation through Dave Smith?
yes,
There was that the
yes,
first
that was
time I
like
was
the first time
introduced?
those ideas really came up. And then I think I did a search of like Dave Smith Federal Reserve, and then like conversations between him and Tom Woods came up. So
Okay.
then that really got me, down the rabbit hole of all that. And then it was like very rapidly then after I discovered that, and this was like 2018, I want to say. I started to really get into libertarian economics, and because I started to realize all of the things I cared about as a lefty, like income inequality, corporate bailouts, bank bailouts, economic instability, and also always kind of being anti-war and against like the war on drugs and all that. I started to realize, like, wow, like the Federal Reserve and the government control over currency is like what empowers the government to do all of the worst things that it does that I hate. And also, like, I don't know, it just clicked with me that, like, okay, yeah, the reason the rich keep getting so much richer and the poor are getting poorer and the middle class is disappearing, like, it's not because people, the magic's coming magically from nowhere. The money is coming from the Federal Reserve, and this is almost like an intentional Ponzi scheme set up by those in power. And so, it's not like the things I cared about changed. I just got information I had never received before to more accurately understand the problem. Because when you're on the left, I don't think you can accurately understand the problem. You just kind of, I mean, unless you are like just, you have to blame everything on capitalism, and capitalism is just the big bad, boogeyman. But when you start listening to libertarians talk about, like, that sort of like Misesian idea, like, okay, well, the idea of like economic price calculation and, like, if we don't have a free market, well, how do central planning doesn't work. It just, over like a 6-month period, and talking to libertarians online and stuff who were giving me, Mises, Rothbard, all that. Yeah, I just kind of transformed into more of a Rothbardian libertarian. And I met some local guys from the Mises caucus, and they sort of, finished my indoctrination, so to speak.
So you were somebody who, when ran across someone on the internet and said, "Can you explain this to me?" and they said, "Here, go read this book." You went and read the book.
Yes,
Actually,
yes. I'm an oddity. I'm someone who has had their mind changed by arguing with people on the internet. I'm also someone from the political left who people either from the Mises caucus or like associated with the Mises caucus recruited to libertarianism, which is I had Dave Smith on my podcast like back in April, and I told him, I was like, it's always so funny when people go after him and Tom. It's just like, these guys are just trying to do this alt-right to libertarian pipeline or whatever, and they don't, I was just like, I don't know, like, I know a lot of people who kind of have that more left of center background like me, who kind of came to the LP and the Mises caucus and were influenced by people in that sphere, at least, even if they aren't directly, in the caucus.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I don't know if I know anybody who's come to libertarianism from the alt-right, and I don't even know if the alt-right really exists anymore. It doesn't as a political movement. I mean, it had its moment of time a few years ago, but it's kind of just disappeared.
Well, if we're a bunch of Trump nationalists, it's kind of weird that we're trying to pull votes away from the Republican Party, but that's a whole separate topic.
So to dig into Christianity and libertarianism, I've heard you talk about, I think you talked about it here in the beginning of the show, where you started to see the common values in each of them. Can you talk a little bit about some of those overlaps and what you did to explore and connect the dots?
Yeah, sure. So I think what started, and this is sort of like everyone who starts to look into any sort of like, what does the Bible talk about politics? Like, they're going to be directed to sort of like key passages that are that Christians have historically used to justify the idea of like the state, or like monopolistic, civil governance. So that's kind of where I started, because I wanted to see, like, I think my motivation was, well, are there any loopholes that I can find in these passages? But that was, it was kind of encouraging to me early on that when I went to these passages, not only were they not incompatible with libertarianism, I thought they were actually, when you understood them in their original context, they were preaching libertarianism. So what I like to start with is Romans 13, and this is sort of like the boogeyman of, why Christians can't be libertarians, and it's going to be, Romans 13, bashed over your head endlessly. And when you go and read Romans 13, and Romans 13 doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Like it was written as an entire letter that Paul wrote. Mm-hmm. So what happens immediately before Romans 13 is important. The context is in Romans 12. Paul is sort of echoing Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount and saying, like, to summarize, that, God with God rests the final judgment of people, and he brings vengeance on the wicked. And that's not our job. Our job is sort of like to turn the other cheek, to love not just our neighbors, but to love our enemies, and to, not be overcome by the evil oppression of people who are trying to do harm, and to try to, like, meet fire with fire and overcome darkness with darkness, but rather that only light can drive out darkness, and we're supposed to overcome evil with good. So Romans 13 then goes and talks about civil governance in that context, because, like, the natural question someone would have to what Paul is talking about in Romans 12 is, okay, well, are we just supposed to roll over and let bad people kill everybody and steal from everybody and just kind of be like, well, thank you, sir, can I have another, and just and just let evil abound? And so Paul's clarifying that no, there is supposed to be those who and the original Greek here is the hyperacusia, which basically means the higher or godly authorities. So it's important to start out, like, God's not using, like, Paul wasn't using a word that would describe the state. He's using a generic term, godly or heavenly authorities, and they are
He's not talking
ordained.
about the modern context of
Right.
political authority.
Yeah, what's funny, some people forget this, is that contrary to some evangelical Christian beliefs, the Bible was not written in English. You have to actually go back and understand a little bit of Greek and a little bit of the cultural context it was written in. But yeah, so the godly authorities are ordained by God for the administration of civil governance. And what that means, and it goes on to explain what this means. He says, they are ministers of God for your good. If you do good, you have nothing to fear from those who are in authority. But if you do evil, beware, for they do not bear the sword in vain. So, and it expounds upon that to say that, those who do good continue to do good, and they will be protected from those who do evil. So it's like, okay, so God is describing that there are people who will be ordained to exercise godly authority to administer justice. Well, libertarians are not against the idea of administering justice against those who would violate the rights of others, right? Like, we're not the misunderstood or like the often troped idea of what anarchy is, where it's just like no rules and anything goes, right? And those of us who are
out there saying that you should just be allowed to murder your neighbor,
right? Exactly.
So we're libertarians advocating for that,
right? Like, we're not against rules, right? So right away it's like, okay, well, what should the people who are in governance do then to administer those rules? And it's very clear here. It says that those who are in godly positions of godly authority are not a terror to those who do good. So Romans 13 is not describing every state or every institution of human governance that's ever existed, right? Because that would make no sense. Like, to call Nazi Germany a minister of God for your good and not a terror to those who do good is just a non sequitur. Like, it just does. That's not even a coherent sentence. And we have examples in the Bible of Jews and Christians who disobeyed people in authority, right? Like, so, on my podcast, Daniel 3, Meshach, Radshach, and Abednego refused to bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar, and they were thrown in a fire and preserved by God for their obedience and their refusal to bow down to anyone but God. They were, that was a law that was passed by the Babylonian king, by the state, quote unquote, and they disobeyed it. So clearly, the limit that God puts on those on authority is that they are to use their authority to only go after those who would initiate force against others. It's not to be the minute you are. This is basically a proof text, and Romans 13 is not describing what the state is. It is prescribing the biblical norms for civil governance, which is that well, go after those who do evil and leave the good people alone. So anytime there's any entity, whether it's a state, whether it's polycentric anarcho-capitalist government, like God through Paul is basically saying, like, listen, yeah, there are rules, but go after the evil people and restrain them from going and victimizing people and protect good people. And also in the context of Romans 12, like, we cannot take on the evil that we are trying to oppose. So if your idea of stopping those who do evil is to yourself use evil against them. So it's like, you know how we should stop people from stealing? We should steal 20% of the wealth from the entire country to create a standing army of people with guns who will, quote unquote, protect your property, but really they won't show up till after a crime is committed, and they'll enforce all of our rules. And no, by the way, if you don't pay this extortion, and then you refuse to pay the fine, they'll come to detain you and arrest you at the point of a gun. Like, no, that you've become an extortion racket. You've become those who do evil in the name of doing good. And this is not only antithetical to Romans 13, it's actually, in my opinion, it's a second commandment violation, because you're taking the name of God, you're taking the name of justice in vain when you do so. So, all it takes is reading these verses, these passages in context, and seeing that, really there's nothing there that's in violation of libertarian ideas of political structures and authority. Like, we're not anti-authority, we're not anti-law and order. We're just saying that those who are in authority are held to the same rules and standards as us, and they can't initiate force against peaceful people. There's nothing in Romans 13 or the rest of the Bible that comes into conflict with that. But that's a good example to start with, because it's supposed to be the haymaker against our position, but really, in my opinion, it's almost like the strongest argument in favor of ours.
I agree, and the way you explained that, I think was fantastic. But another haymaker that someone might throw is render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God's what is God's. So what's your response or your description of the biblical text back on that?
So I actually have a whole podcast episode I did a month and a half ago.
Please plug your podcast where you've talked about this.
Yeah. So for like a very full detailed explanation, go to Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy. I forget the episode number, but it's part of my series, which is entitled Austrian Economics in the Bible. And
send me the link, and I'll have it on the show notes page for this for people to
find.
Find
I'll send you the link. So render unto Caesar. So I drew a little bit from, there's actually a good article, which we can plug this to, and I plug this in my episode, on Mises.org that actually goes into this a little bit. But to set the stage, the Pharisees brought up a trap for Jesus, right? Because the Pharisees hated Jesus. They're trying to find any way they can to basically throw him into the arms of the Romans to have him killed, or to have him discredited completely among the Jewish people. So back then, I think you remember when you're reading the New Testament, if you've gone through it, how people would complain about Jesus and say he hangs out with sinners and prostitutes and tax collectors, which first of all, I always love how all three of those are thrown in like the same thing. It's just like the sinners and the prostitutes, okay, but Jesus, the tax collectors, you hang out with tax collectors.
Yeah,
it's too far.
There's a verse where the tax collector, I think is referred to as the worst of all three. Yeah.
Yes. So, so the reason for this is because the Jewish people had a very libertarian view, actually, of the Roman Empire. They viewed them as false authority, as claiming to be, like Caesar claimed to be divine, so he was claiming to be God, and they viewed that entire government as illegitimate. And the idea of paying tribute to Caesar was, to the Jewish people, an act of idolatry. And to do that was actually you would discredit yourself among the religious Jews. So they go to Jesus with this question of should you pay tribute to Caesar? And their idea is they've trapped him, right? Because he has no choice but to answer the question, either by answering what he knows to be the correct religious Jewish answer on this. And by saying so out loud, they will be able to then show the Romans, like, see, he's saying that your authority is illegitimate and people shouldn't pay their tributes to you, which will get him in trouble with the Romans and locked up. Or he will have to find some way to say that you should pay tribute to Caesar, in which case he's now discredited himself as someone who's simping for the oppressors. His answer is like a beautiful like cutting through the bullshit answer and answers the question without getting him in trouble. It's like the only kind of it's an answer that only someone either as smart as Jesus or divine as Jesus could really come up with in the moment. Because he says, like almost mocking them, he's like come on now, like show me, like bring me a coin, okay, a denarius is what he says. Bring me a denarius. That's what people who did business with the Romans used to pay tribute to Caesar. And so one of the Pharisees brings out a denarius, not realizing this exposes the Pharisees as someone who's doing business with the Roman Empire and paying tribute to the Roman Empire. You didn't have a denarius unless you were paying tribute to the Roman Empire at some point. So already Jesus has exposed them just there. But he says, so whose face is on this coin? And they say Caesar's. So then Jesus hands it back and he says, all right, so render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, but to God what is God's. And then like the passage ends with the Pharisees going like, and astounded by his answer, they just walked away in anger. So clearly the Pharisees could not have taken his answer to mean, for starters, like if that answer means pay tribute to Caesar, the Pharisees wouldn't have been walking away upset. They would have been like, ha, we got him. But no, they knew that's not what he was saying. What he was saying was, listen, if you're going to get in bed with the devil, if you're going to do business with Rome, well, that's your own choice. So if you decide to, and this is kind of like, through the New Testament, it's often repeated like to pay tribute to whom tribute is owed and taxes to whom taxes is owed. But the idea behind that was like, if you go and you use some sort of service, you shouldn't be a freeloader and use that service for free. You should pay what you're owed. And this is really just another way of saying property rights should be enforced, right? Mm-hmm. By the way, there was no word for tax in Greek. It was just tribute. And tribute's kind of a generic term that just basically means like a duty, like something that's owed to someone. But again, I don't think libertarians would say, well, there are times when like you do business with someone and you owe them something. Like if I go into a restaurant and I sit down and I order some food and the food comes out and I eat it, and then they come to me with a check and I go, well, hold on, you didn't tell me up front that I had to pay. Like that's silly. Like there's an expectation, and it's kind of like, you don't need signs everywhere to be like, okay, if you go and you do business with someone, if you consume something that they're providing for you, like, there's sort of a contract there, even if it's not, signed before you start, that like you're supposed to pay them for their service. So, a good Christian, a good godly person shouldn't be trying to cheat people or swindle people, give them what they're owed. But, maybe if you work with Caesar, you owe him, but that wouldn't be something that Jesus would recommend you do, because he follows it up with, well, give to God what is God's. So then we have to ask, okay, what is Caesar's and what is God's? Well, the Jewish and Christian idea would be that everything belongs to God, but what really belongs to God, what Jesus is getting at, is to give God your worship, to give God your devotion, to say, I will not bow to any other king or any other divine authority other than God. That is that's the first commandment, right? You shall have no other God other than me. That is first and foremost what you owe God. And then you owe to God to follow his moral commands. That means like, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not murder. Okay. Well, the state does all of that. And Caesar was doing all of that, as well as like promoting, all this debauchery and degeneracy and all these like, just truly wicked, evil things that happened, under the Roman Empire. So what is Caesar owed? Is Caesar owed that which he claims by force? You won't find that in the Bible. In fact, there's, in that series I did, Austrian Economics in the Bible, there are so many passages throughout the scriptures that basically spell out property rights, saying like, you aren't owed, like there's even a great passage. It's the parable of the parable of the vineyard, where basically Jesus says, "You're not even owed what is fair." Jesus says you're not owed something from someone just because of this sort of like idea that well, everyone should get their fair share. What Jesus says is you're only owed what you agree can voluntarily negotiate with in the marketplace. So like if you agree to get paid like $5 for something, and then someone else comes along and does the same thing as you did, but they negotiated to get $10, that person doesn't owe you $5 because you were a poor negotiator. So like that's like the parable of the vineyard. So there's so many examples where Jesus and the scriptures are talking about like how, basically like the Austrian view of property rights. So Caesar isn't owed what he claims by force. He's only owed that which he can negotiate for through a property rights-based system. So that's basically the most condensed summary of that passage I can give. I go into much more detail, kind of line by line, in that episode that I can give you to plug.
For sure. And I'll put that on the show notes page as well for everyone to listen to in full. So there's all these overlapping aspects between libertarianism and the Bible. There's, you're calling out these different areas where it's just purely, you could look at it and say, well, did an Austrian economist write this? So when you see that,
to be clear, I'm not saying that like the Bible is actually talking about like using the same terms or like
right.
The Bible predates Austrian economics. Like that's more of the views, the economic views that we find in the Bible are basically the same as what Mises and Rothbard and the Misesian, Austrian School of Economics discovered and taught later.
The core of what I'm getting at is the principles in themselves.
Yeah,
that's where the overlap is, not in the how it's described or explained,
right?
Or even saying which one does it better, because I'm sure there's much better books specifically on Austrian economics written that are obviously the Bible is not an Austrian.
Oh yeah, the Bible is not a economic thesis. You know what I mean? Like you can find teachings about economics in it, but it's primarily a religious document about the relationship between man and God and the history of Jesus and the apostles and the early church. Whereas you go get Human Action by Mises or Choice by Bob Murphy. Like those are very clearly deep dives into the nitty gritty of of economic principles.
Yeah, 100%. But to get back to the principles, I've heard it said before that really libertarianism is really has taken these principles, or not, they haven't stolen them, but they've used. There's a lot of the same principles that build up the foundation of libertarianism, and I've heard it be said that really libertarianism is Christianity just without Jesus. Is that
yes.
something
you're quoting the good old, whatever they want to be called, Praxian, post-lib, disenfranchised, Misesian libertarians. Yeah, I've heard this.
What's your thought on that?
Yeah. I tried to have this conversation with a guy named Adam Patrick on my show, and I've gotten to a little bit of this with Andrew from Popular Liberty, and I've tried to have Matt Erickson on my show, but he doesn't care to come on, although he likes to talk about me on his podcast. So hey, free publicity, right? So listen, I think that I don't want to promote a compartmentalized view of reality. I don't think we should go through life where it's like, right now I'm a libertarian, and then you take the libertarian hat off and put on it. Right now I'm a Christian, and then you go home to your wife and your spouse and go, now I'm a father. No, you should be an integrated being. And so as a Christian, I'll start there. As a Christian, first and foremost, at the top of my hierarchy of what I want to see in society, and when I'm conversing with people, whether they're friends or family or strangers, I want to see people's lives improved by, in the same ways my life has been improved by a relationship with Jesus Christ, by accepting the truth of the gospel message and the hope that's found in there. And I think that people going to church and living out the morals and the values that are found in the Bible is the best way to live a life personally. It's the best way to raise your kids and to have a family. And I think your community is best lived out that way. So, that's all nice and good, right? Like, that's what I want. I can't make people do that, right? Like, I can try, I do my best, evangelize, meet people where they're at, but like, Christianity's existed for 2,000 years, and there's always been people in the world who aren't Christian. It's sort of like, until such a time as, if there is, depending on your eschatology, if there's some sort of end times or transition to a different age or whatever, like, as long as what we have now more or less continues, there are always going to be people who aren't Christians. So it's like, okay, a Christian value is peace, right? Like, we're pro peace, we're pro loving our neighbor and loving our enemies, and war and trying to use conquest to force Christianity on people, to me, is antithetical to Christianity, and
I just want to say,
doesn't work.
Interject here. I 100% agree with you, but someone listening to this who is not a Christian and will cite examples of neoconservative warmongers using the Bible as justification for going to war. But
and
yes,
those Christians are using the Bible and using the religion in vain and twisting things, and they should be called out. And this is very similar to how, when there are people who have called themselves, and who I think are libertarians, and they'll make libertarian arguments for what is essentially authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we've all seen it, whether it's like for, like I've seen people who have tried to make libertarian arguments for why America should go to war with Russia in the defense of Ukraine. It's, you know what I mean? It's like, now listen, like, I don't want to judge those people and be like, you're not a real libertarian. Like, I think at heart they are libertarian, but like, they're massively in this one spot misunderstanding and misapplying principles. In that same fashion, Christianity could be true or valuable or good, and yet there could be certain people who misapply it inappropriately and should be called out. So, but that is a good point to raise. And believe me, I spend much more time punching across the aisle at my fellow Christians than I do punching out at atheists or other religions, because
I believe
kind of in the Jordan Peterson sense, like, clean your own room. It's like, it's like get my house in perfect order. I want to get my Christian brothers and sisters, to stop committing so many errors in the name of God. So part of what motivated my podcast. But to get back to the other question, so we shouldn't be using Christianity to justify a conquest of the world to make everyone Christian. Not only is that proven not to work, but it's just antithetical to everything Jesus taught. It's not what the apostles did. I don't know if this is maybe offensive to some people, but if there's any religion out there that teaches that, it's Islam, not Christianity, as far as like conquest by the sword. Christians have certainly done that in the past, but not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to try to live what Romans 12 says word for word is, insofar as it depends upon you, live at peace with all. It's like, okay, what is the best way to promote living at peace among all, including those who aren't Christians? Libertarian philosophy and what it says about both political structures and about economics, those principles, which are biblical principles, I would argue, but expounding upon those principles in libertarian activism is one of the best tools that Christians have for trying to live out that biblical call to live at peace among all people. I mean, you could maybe say that you could be agnostic on political theory and do nothing, and I guess that's fine. But if you're going to be promoting any type of political theory, to me, there's nothing on the table other than libertarianism as far as what you can promote that both is consistent with like a personal application of scripture, and then also consistent with like reaching out into the community and trying to have a society in which you can live out those principles consistently. So I understand the concern Like to steelman the concern that the Praxian post-libertarian types have, they don't like people who hyper compartmentalize their life and who become almost ideological libertarians and put libertarianism almost above their Christianity. And I think there's a danger there, but that's like there's a danger with that in anything. And I think Christians should be Christians first, but I think that a necessary consequence of consistent reading of Scripture and trying to make Scripture harmonious with itself, and then to follow out the things that Scripture tells us to do, is there's really not that many options, right? It's either we leave people alone and try to use the marketplace of ideas and persuasion and peaceful activism to bring people to Christ as much as we can, and then leaving people alone, the people who refuse to do that, so long as they're not hurting people, or we don't, which basically just leaves on the table violence, which is like, well, the minute someone can make an argument that squares using violence to convert people to Christianity or to force Christian values on them with the entirety of Scripture, I'll be impressed.
Yeah, I guess the way that I see the two sides of the argument or their disagreement or whatever it is those who believe that, okay, because libertarianism and Christianity are so close, why are we wasting our time with libertarianism and not just talking about Christianity and trying to bring more people to Jesus? Then there's the other side.
Well, the problem is not everyone who follows Jesus follows the correct political philosophy. So we kind of have a fight on both fronts. It's like you still need
the other side. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying one is right or wrong. I mean, I'm just kind of framing it for the listener here. And
Right.
maybe eventually we'll have a debate on this show, and I can get Matt or Adam to come on and talk to you.
Oh, I'd be completely open to doing that. And I actually I think more so than a lot of people in our camps, so to speak, I try to get along with those people. I love Pete Quinones. I like Matt, even though he sometimes dodges me, but I still like what these people have to say. And I think in some ways they're at least more than a lot of people have been, mostly good faith critics of the Mises Caucus and of libertarian activism, more so than other people we've gone up against. So it's I think there's a baby in the bathwater there, but I don't think one has to just say reject libertarianism and just it's almost like they want to reject thin libertarianism and substitute a thick Christianity, which is just listen, I'd love for everyone to be Christian, but they're not going to be. And there's also a lot of Christians who are deeply confused about economics and political philosophy. So we have to.
There's the potential to lead people to Christianity through libertarianism.
Yeah, I'd say
by
that too.
showing how similar the two are. If you're getting someone along that track who maybe is an atheist or has never had any sort of belief in God, and as they come to realize, maybe they stumble across your podcast after they're become a libertarian and start looking at these ideas, and then who knows what can happen. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I think it's a very interesting discussion, and I really think a lot of this disagreement, especially in this area when it comes to talking about Christianity between post-libertarians and libertarians, or whatever you want to call it, a lot of the problem comes down to, I think there's a perception of there being more anger and sort of animosity due to just Twitter being the vehicle of communication. If we were just talking to each other in person, I don't think any of us would think there was a bitter disagreement.
Oh yeah. Well, the whole I saw, and it was all, even that banter wasn't good fun, but Dave was ribbing them for making a 5-hour podcast on if Dave Smith was a friend or a Fed. But as much as there's shit talking across the aisle, that episode they actually said, no, Dave Smith is cool and we just disagree with him on political strategy and some stuff, which is fine. And to me, it's I actually commend them. Go do your thing. Division of labor, that's a libertarian and a Christian idea. We want to talk about what the Bible says about the body of Christ, and the eyes are not the feet and the hands are not the mouth, and the different parts of the body perform different functions and not one is better than the other. And that's basically like the libertarian idea of division of labor almost right there. And like some people are going to focus on like community and building things that will hopefully come like that will either directly obsolete the state, or if the state becomes irrelevant through some other means, these are things that will hopefully replace the state in their communities and stuff. So that's good. If that's where your calling is, go do that. Other people, and like I feel this personally, like I have more of like I feel like a more evangelistic calling to kind of go out into the more public arena and to engage people. And whether that's, and I can do both at the same time. Like, you can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. I can always be promoting Christian ideas and values. But then if I kind of like meet somebody and it's like, okay, well, they're not open to Christianity right now. It's like, well, let me at least promote the libertarian, or let me at least promote the political order that allows us to continue to have those conversations rather than be pointing guns at each other. Because the pointing guns at each other makes it hard to evangelize.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. We are out of time, though. Before I let you go, though, please plug your podcast, let people know where they can find you on social and all that good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So podcast is on YouTube if you want to watch it live. Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy on there. If you want to listen to the audio version that comes out later, that's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that good stuff. Just search Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is @Biblical Anarchy, which is right here on the screen. And my website is daniel318.com if you want to check that out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I appreciate you having me on, John. A lot of fun.
Jacob, thanks for coming on the show. Be sure to check out his podcast, Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy, and we'll talk soon. Hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Jacob Daniel, a.k.a. Jacob Winograd. Like I've said many times in the past several months, the reason why I changed my format of this show, why I changed the name from Felony Friday to Finding Freedom, is because I wanted the opportunity to have conversations like this. I wanted to talk to people about their faith, about their spirituality. And, even better if we can talk about how those ideas tie over into the political realm, into the philosophical realm. So excellent conversation with Jacob today. I'm sure down the road I will have him on again, and I would love to host a conversation with Jacob and some who might disagree with him on the post-libertarian side. Okay, so if you're enjoying this show, if you've listened this far, first of all, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a fan. You can share the show. I would appreciate that. But more than anything, what I would appreciate and my fellow Lions would appreciate, if you haven't already, come join us in the Lions of Liberty Pride. Join the growing community. You can do so on Patreon or Locals. Patreon is patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, and Locals is lionsofliberty.locals.com. You can listen to our interviews live and watch them. You can watch and listen at the same time, either on Facebook, or we do it through an unlisted YouTube link that we publish out ahead of these interviews. Most of our interviews we do this for, I should say, not all. So you can do that and comment, all that good stuff. Of course, you get access to the other bonus content and bonus shows that we have. Of course, with Brian McWilliams, his long-running show now, Good Morning Bleephead. I'm not going to curse because this will be a clean show. I don't have to click the explicit box on Apple Podcasts if I don't curse, because we didn't curse up till now, so why do it now? So you definitely want to come join us in the Lions of Liberty Pride if you haven't already, and you definitely want to check out our merchandise. Go to lionsofliberty.store. If you're in the Pride, you get a discount on the merchandise as well. So check it out, and I will leave you with that. Like I've been saying so often recently, at least for me in Western Pennsylvania, this has been such a beautiful, incredible summer to this point, and I hope everyone is getting outside and soaking in the beautiful vitamin D that is just streaming down from the sky for free. So if you can do that, and if you're in a rainy area, sucks for you, move somewhere where it's sunny. I probably should do the same when it's bound to get cloudy and cold here, obviously, in the fall and winter. But I won't. So, pot, kettle, black. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fire just will be burning.